right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending. This is kind of a special meeting of our policy committee. What we've already done is a couple weeks ago, we had a policy committee meeting where we went over Single Police Department's new protest policy, which is that's what we're calling it, but it's actually the First Amendment expression policy. What we wanted to do is use this opportunity to gather additional community feedback. And so what we have is we have a couple guest speakers to kind of share their opinions on the policy. And then what I was also going to do is give a quick summary of what we discussed at the policy committee meeting. And then we'll hopefully have like the last hour or so for public comment and feedback. So with that, I will officially call the meeting to order. We'll do a quick roll call for our policy committee. I'll just read through who we have based on the panelist list. Obviously, I'm currently the chair of the policy committee. We have first vice chair Doug Case, we have Joe Craver, we have Andrew Delbert Griffin, and Robin Spruce. Actually, let me quickly check the attendees. Yep, and that's it for right now. So with that, I believe we have 2 or 3 officially, it's supposed to be non-agenda public comment, but I'm not sure what the comments are. Obviously, as we go through the various policy recommendations, people can, we'll allow people to raise their hand and we can ask questions and we can make comments. So Charmaine, can you please read the non-agenda public comments?
Okay, before I read the non-agenda public comments, I want to note that Nancy Vaughn is excused. She's not in the meeting yet. And Patrick Anderson is excused as well. So the first one is Jackie Barajas, and she reads, as a registered nurse, I strongly advocate for banning the use of bikes, tear gas, and stinger grenades against members of our community as weapons. I have witnessed such acts of police violence in our communities, especially communities of color, while being present for first aid at local demonstrations. We as a community must continue to speak out against these methods of police brutality. Allison Ho comments, I highly encourage the board to evaluate the policing that has occurred at events in San Diego this past summer until today. The gross use of force at this summer's nonviolent protests against police brutality is inhumane and speaks to a large bias of SDPD, especially when compared to their response at the many Defend East County and anti-masking rallies in Pacific Beach, for example. Why did this happen? Incorporate deliberate verbiage in the protest policy to address and prevent this. Next public comment is Yvonne Elkin. She comments, after reading through the new policy multiple times, the new phrase that stands out is the use of the term disturbing the public peace is included in the definition of riot. We need a much clearer definition of disturbing the public peace because the intent of a public protest is to disturb the public peace to send a message. It is possible to disturb the peace and still be fully nonviolent. Police dispersal or use of force action should never be initiated unless there is imminent threat of violence toward individuals or destruction of property. I want to see more clarity in defining when police can take action and not leave as much to discretion. That concludes public comments.
Okay, thank you very much. What I was going to do now, and I'll pull up the agenda in a moment. So the first item what I was going to do is I was going to share my screen and go over what we had discussed at the policy committee meeting. Give me one second. And I did modify this a little bit. It's the same base information, but I was trying to make it a little bit more clear and kind of keep things categorized. So if you looked at the agenda, what you saw is I went kind of page by page through the existing policy. So actually, you know what? Let me share the other screen real quick. I want to show you what we've, sorry, give me one second. I want to share what we had done to date because I think that's important as well. Okay. So what we've done to date This was as of our policy committee meeting. Back in May and June of 2020, the policy committee began researching and reviewing policies from across the country. Specifically, we ended up looking at San Francisco, Oakland, BART, which is the Bay Area Rapid Transit up in the Bay Area, Washington, DC, Seattle, Fresno, and we also looked at information from NACOL, which is kind of the civilian oversight kind of trade group, so to speak. Also in May of 2020, we reached out to ACLU and NAACP, requested feedback on what they would potentially like to see in any new protest policy. In June, the policy committee met and we presented our policies that we found, specifically Oakland, Washington, DC, Seattle, and Madison, Wisconsin. The CRB Executive Committee, so that's the chairs of all of the committees of the CRB at the time. We met and we reviewed the current SWAT and the Mobile Field Force Guide documents. The Mobile Field Force Guide is the document that really kind of from a high level says what you can do and when as a police officer in protest related events. And that illustrates how the police department currently addresses the protest activities and unlawful assemblies. We worked with the San Diego Police Department to explain the need for a standalone policy. What we realized is the department was really only leveraging the existing policies that they already had. So for example, that was things like use of force, handcuffing, when you can use chemical agents, et cetera. We discussed the pros and cons of officers using their body-worn cameras during protest activities. One of the things that we said it was considered, we felt was a pro was it actually shows that if they do declare an unlawful assembly, that there was a legitimate and valid reason to do so. One of the cons, of course, is there's public concern, there's a little abbreviated there, public concern about, protest activities being recorded and potentially being used inappropriately. We also reviewed major policy changes that other cities across the countries have made. The most common elements were either modifying or banning the use of chemical agents, pepper spray, for example, modifying or banning the use of flashbang devices, and also rubber bullets. So with that, I will go to the other document real quick. All right, so one of the things that we discussed in our last meeting that I noticed, and I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of community feedback on this, there are some areas where I really felt that the department needs to restate that several existing policies remain in full force and effect. So the ones that we had talked about was the body-worn camera policy, the already existing de-escalation policy, a duty that officers have to intervene if an officer sees another officer doing something that's inappropriate or violates policy, that they need to step in to stop that. I added this, but it was based on the discussion we had. The requirement that officers still need to identify themselves either by name and or their ID, and there are some changes to that. So the department did have a new policy change that said in a protest, after incident commanders have approved it, officers no longer have to say, I'm Officer Smith, my badge number is 1234. They would only have to say their badge number is 1234. But we want to see those things to be restated in this policy to say that they remain in full force and effect during all protest activities. We also wanted to have a section added that specifically details how juveniles are handled during protest activities. So specifically, existing policy says that minors should not really be handcuffed in most situations, and requirements about the minors being taken into custody. One of the things that kind of goes to one of the public comments we had, we'd like to see clarification that protests will not be considered to be unlawful just because they're boisterous. So on page 7 of the documents that the department has, they have the legal definition of what an unlawful assembly is. But we would like to see that a little more clear, that just because something is loud and obnoxious, that they're not going to use that to try to stifle, lawful protest activity. We would also like to see the proof or evidence, possibly with the BWC video documentation, to show that there's a clear and present danger of violence or property damage before an unlawful assembly would be declared. I merged all these together. Again, there's multiple notes we made on several pages, but this is all relating to the dispersal orders. We noticed that there's a conflict between a couple sections. One of them says that no specific verbiage is required when you're declaring an unlawful assembly, and then another section provided specific language. So we would actually like to see that specific language be required. I think it's better to have a very specific outline. The other thing that the current policy, as everyone who's read it has probably noticed, there's not a lot of specifics. So we feel the dispersal order needs to be given a minimum of 3 times, preferably with 1 minute in between each order. And we'd like to see that order also include a time requirement that individuals have to comply, say, for example, 5 minutes, but we feel like it should not be less than 3 minutes. Officers should have their body-worn cameras activated in event mode. That just means that it's on and it's recording and you hear the audio to record the dispersal order. And then we'd also like to see an officer stationed behind a crowd, also with their camera on, to be able to confirm that people who are in a crowd would be able to hear the dispersal order before going in and trying to clear out a crowd. We'd like to see the department provide some clarification on ample means of egress. One of our concerns there was if there's individuals who might have mobility issues, wheelchairs, whatever. We want to make sure that if there is a dispersal order and someone who is perhaps trying to exit a scene but is having some difficulty just because of mobility issues, that they don't suddenly have a problem because of that. Currently, the languages that are utilized is English and Spanish. But we were also wondering, obviously, depending on where you are in the city, there might be other languages that need to be used. And then one of our concerns was if people are hearing impaired, how might that go? I know, obviously, if it's a spur of the moment protest, it's going to be a little bit harder, but many protests are planned in advance. And if so, I think it's something that we could suggest that they use traffic signs to try to help facilitate those. EMS staging, the idea there, so for the emergency medical teams, we would like to see that not only are they being staged properly, but they need to have the proper materials on hand given a situation. So for example, if officers were to go in and use chemical agents, pepper spray, existing policy requires that within 30 minutes of someone having a chemical agent sprayed on them, they need to be decontaminated with water. So we want to see all of the EMS staff have appropriate water supplies to be able to address that situation. Another one we saw was we want to see a definition of reasonable. So one of the things says a reasonable amount of time will be allowed for the crowd to comply with police commands before taking action. Again, we want to see them specify what reasonable is. So one of our proposals is that reasonable amount of time, but not less than 3 minutes will be allowed. And then also we wanted to have that be extra clear to say, is that by leaving the scene, starting to depart, or fully being gone? Because I think that's an important piece as well. One thing that we also talked about in our last meeting was resistance during protests. So I did put the definitions of these two terms. So passive resistance, and that's what's in parentheses is the definition there. Passive resistance is behavior that consists of a refusal to comply with verbal commands and does not convey a threat to the officer, or another person. We feel that during a protest, if it's a legitimate protest, that the officers should not be using impact weapons, impact control holds, pain compliance, or pressure points. Typically with the existing use of force policy, which is 1.04, the use of force policy would theoretically allow that. We feel that in a, for example, if you have people that are sitting in the street, blocking traffic, but otherwise they're not really, causing much problem, we don't feel it's appropriate for officers to go in and start to use pain compliance to try to get people to do what they want. And we also, at this point, we also feel that policy needs to reiterate that chemical agents should not be utilized in that circumstance. People that are exhibiting active resistance, which is behavior that consists of a refusal to comply with verbal commands and conveys a threat to the officer or another person, consists of physical opposition attempts of control by the officer. I think at that point, we can open this up to discussion as well. Our question is, at that point, what restrictions should be coming into play? And I think obviously it depends on the totality of the circumstances and the situation that's happening. Specialty munitions. This is usually the SWAT related stuff. If they come in with pepper balls, things like that. The existing policy, they have 6 bullet items, and I feel those should be marked kind of in order of the importance of that they would use them. The 40 millimeter foam baton rounds, we feel like that should be used only as a last resort. Number 5 on their category was the CS gas grenades. That's the tear gas. We'd like to see explicit references of when the use of that is acceptable. And then I do need to get some information from the department, specifically on what number 6, the rubber sting balls are. I believe it's kind of like a little, I believe it's like a grenade that has like small, like little rubber kind of BBs, for lack of a better word, in it, and that those kind of like pop out. But before we can, I think, really make comments on that, I need to know what they are and how they utilize them so we can figure out how to make a policy recommendation there. On page 13, it talks about flex cuffs. So obviously, if someone's going to be detained, usually an officer will put them in the metal handcuffs. If you have a protest activity with, tens to 50 to 100 people there, they're not going to have that many handcuffs, so they'll need kind of their like zip ties. We want to clarify that officers should replace the flex cuffs if they happen to tighten, because unlike handcuffs, which can be double locked so they don't tighten, flex cuffs don't have that. So the existing policy requires that an officer put their fingertip between the handcuffs to make sure that there's sufficient space and there's no risk of injury, cutting off blood supply to the hands. We feel like that should be marked in there. One of the other things that we had possibly suggested is officers should have like a Sharpie or some kind of a marker, and they can mark, once they actually put those flex cuffs on, they can mark where it was. So if they see that that mark has now moved and it's become tighter, that it's a good sign that they need to replace those. I marked this in blue just as something that was not discussed at the last meeting, is that we think officers should write their, we say shall because that's a requirement, shall write their ID number on the flex cuffs. My thought process there is it helps. If you have, say, for example, 100 people that are at a protest, it's going to be hard for people to know, okay, say, for example, I was arrested or I was detained, which officer detained me. So if they write their ID number on the handcuffs, it makes it, or the flex cuffs, it makes it easier to identify who did what. Body worn cameras during protests. Basically, the current policy says that during demonstrations that officers should refrain from recording during peaceful events. And this is something that I would love to open it up to public discussion here to hear what people's thoughts are. As I said, there's pros and cons to both. So I think that's something we want to discuss, but we also want to consider changes or additions to the existing body worn camera retention period. I need to actually find out what the current retention period is for body worn cameras at an event like this. But say it's, I don't know, 30 days, I'm making up a number. If that's a standard, we keep it for the standard retention period if they have not declared it to be an unlawful assembly. And then maybe we come up with a new retention period if they do say that this is an unlawful assembly. Maybe instead of 30 days, maybe it becomes 90 days or 120 days or whatever we decide there. Public information media, we wanted to add a new section here. We feel that's important that officers not request or require media or other members of the public to stop recording, either by cell phone or anything like that. We also, based on some of the conversation we had at our last meeting, we wanted to add a section detailing legal observers, what their rights and responsibilities are. And then lastly, this little block I had here was media and legal observers, possibly how do we identify them if they're wearing a shirt, a vest, a hat, something like that, that they should not be told to leave the area so they can continue to report and observe the situation. So in other words, they would not be required to disperse. So from a high level, those were the things we discussed at the policy committee meeting. And then with that, I wanted to introduce our community roundtable discussion members. Also, Kate is, she's co-hosting this. I should have said that earlier, I apologize. Kate is co-hosting this meeting with the commission, and she is representing the National Lawyers Guild. So Kate, do you want to say anything real quick?
No, I mean, I just want to say hello to everybody. And then when I get a chance, I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Lawyers Guild when I introduce Kylie, who's going to talk about our legal observers and what our legal observers think about this policy. But I do want to thank the CPP for doing this. And what I said at the last meeting when all these comments came out is I think it's really the comments that Brandon and other members of the commission have made are really quite good. And of course, we will add to those. But I was very pleased to see the insight that went into some of these comments from CPP people, most of whom I assume have not been legal observers or participants in a lot of demonstrations, but certain. And I guess my question would be later on is how many complaints have you seen over the last year from people who've been involved in demonstrations? I'm kind of curious about that, but we can talk about that later.
Thanks, Kate. So with that, we're actually a little bit ahead of time, which is amazing. And then Alex, I apologize. I started talking before we let you in, and I'm glad to see someone moved you in as a panelist, so you'll be able to speak in a moment. But first, I'm going to kick it over to Kylie. She is the National Lawyer Guild's Legal Observer Program Coordinator. So Kylie, I will kick it over to you.
Howdy, everyone.
This is Kate. I think I'm going to introduce Kylie a little bit. Like I just said, I do want to talk to people who are not particularly aware of what the National Lawyers Guild is and what we do. And I'm sure that most people are. Alex, of course, is a longtime member of the Guild, as well as Kylie and myself. The National Lawyers Guild is a national progressive legal organization of lawyers, legal workers, law students, and jailhouse lawyers. And we have chapters all across the country in every state. We were founded in 1937, primarily as a reaction to the fact that the American Bar Association did not allow people of color or Jews to be part of the ABA. And so we have been open to everybody since that time, women, people of color, people of any religion. And we are the only National Bar Association, as far as I know, that has law students, legal workers, and jailhouse lawyers as full members. And we are known nationally for our Legal Observer Program, and Kylie will explain that a little bit more about what we do. But we also do a lot of other things, as well as Legal Observer programs. We have two national projects. The one of most interest, I think, to this group would be our National Police Accountability Project. And the current president of that project is Julia Yu, who is a local San Diego person, a civil rights attorney. And that project does national work, research, and assistance with people who bring complaints against police misconduct. It's a nationally known project, and we also have a national immigration project that is also nationally known, and we do a lot of other work. But that's just a little bit of introduction to what the National Lawyers Guild is. And now I will introduce Kylie, who has been the coordinator of our Legal Observer Program for the last several years, and has put together just a remarkable program, and has been basically working full-time as the coordinator of the Legal Observer Program for the last year, since the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protests and all of that. And she will tell you whatever she wants. Kylie, you're on.
All right, so yeah, like Kate was saying, I am in charge of Legal Observer Program in the county. Quick background about us: if you've ever seen a protest here in town, you've probably seen people wearing green hats, green helmets, green t-shirts, just green, green, green all around. We are those green people at these demonstrations. Our job is to observe and document police use of force and conduct at these demonstrations, and effectively to document it in the event something goes to trial, or there's a civil issue, et cetera, et cetera. The idea of the Legal Observer Program is effectively to get professional witnesses, professionals who can witness to the events and know what to look for. And because the media doesn't necessarily know what to look for. They don't know the significance of certain actions, but attorneys do, and those with legal training do. The majority of my team does have legal training. I believe most of us at this point are attorneys. So there are a few on our team that do not have any legal training, but again, for the most part, I am looking for people who do have that kind of training. So talking about the protest policy, you're a lot of these issues, especially de-escalation, and especially carrying over the policies, the other policies that relate. I really liked that as well. There are a couple of things that I did want to go over with the protest policy with y'all. So I'll just jump right into it here. First of all, the role of legal observers at these events, we aren't media, and we prefer not to be included with them because we don't operate under the same set of rules as the media. We're not there to immediately tell the public about what's happening. We're there for when legal matters crop up. And so as a result, we're not there necessarily for immediate public knowledge. So we don't really fall under media. What I would say we fall more under, and what should be contemplated in this document, are bystanders. At these protests, there are quite a lot of bystanders that occur. Non-participants, bystanders, however you want to put it. And they aren't really, they're not categorized at all in this document. And this occurs at every demonstration. Bystanders get involved very, very often. Sometimes they can demonstrate against the demonstrator. Sometimes they agree with the demonstrator. Sometimes they're just there to watch. Specifically in Pacific Beach in January, when that use of force occurred, it was about half the people on the side where use of force occurred were not involved in the demonstration. They were simply people watching, and honestly, they wanted to see some violence, so they were just watching the show. So bystanders and non-participants should be included in this document, and legal observers should be included with that as non-participants. Next up, under 7B, under Declaration of Unlawful Assembly, again, I agree that it does need to be a tool of last resort. And again, don't just follow the statute, but follow, in fact, the case law. The case law isn't that it needs to be just boisterous, but it needs to be a threat of imminent harm. The other thing that I would like to see in 7B is the contemplation that Declaration of Unlawful Assembly and the attendant indiscriminate use of force could exacerbate a situation as opposed to toning it down. A good example would be La Mesa back in May. I don't think that the Chase Bank would have burned down had the officers not started firing. And I think that's a very clear-cut example right there. So I do think that it needs to at least be contemplated that the law enforcement should contemplate that they might fail in their objective at quelling a crowd, right? They may just simply excite them further. And so that's one thing that I do think needs to be contemplated. Now, specifically talking about the specific methods of use of force, the use of munitions, is where I'm going to focus a lot of my time. And the basic overview of how I'm feeling about this is that the use of tear gas should replace sting balls in the list. Sting balls should be disallowed. Flashbangs should be disallowed. And use of bicycles as use of force should be disallowed as well. And I'll jump into it first with the use of bicycles. The most use of force that's occurring at these protests isn't use of chemical agents. It's not use of batons. It's not use of anything. It's a bikes. Bicycles are the main method of use of force at protests in San Diego these days. Reason being is because the Central Bike Team has been, or gas lamp enforcement team, I'm not sure the exact name of the team, but I've heard both. They basically follow protests downtown these days at every protest that occurs and are looking for them to step out of line. They're basically waiting for these protesters to do something that they feel that they can jump in with, and then their bike squad moves in force very quickly and starts threatening use of force, sets up quick riot lines, and starts and uses their bikes as a combination weapon / riot shield. The problem with using bikes as use of force, again, and I don't want it to seem like I'm some kind of radical that says that that there's no possible way that use of force is ever going to, police are going to need to use force at some point, but a bicycle is a terrible weapon. It's got all these protruding and jagged edges and gears and things like that can get caught on people, that could lacerate people. The bikes are not like batons. They're not like riot shields. They are more dangerous, and they're less specific in their application of force. And so I really do think that needs to be taken a look at. Second on the list, going down, flashbangs worry me a lot more than the 40 millimeter foam batons. For those who aren't in the know on what the difference is between a flashbang, tear gas canister, and a sting ball. So a flashbang is effectively a grenade. It is a grenade missing a normal military grenade that they throw in war is an explosive surrounded by ceramic. The ceramic breaks and it creates these projectiles, these fragments, and that's what kills people is the fragments that hit people. But the explosive that's in the middle of that grenade, that's basically what a flashbang is. It's the explosive of a grenade minus the fragmentation. There have been multiple documented incidents of people losing arms, hands. People have been killed and incapacitated by these weapons. Permanent hearing loss, obvious, and so is blindness as well. The heat generated by a flashbang grenade is hotter than lava, to give you an idea. I'm gonna link y'all to an article on flashbangs from ProPublica, and that kind of go over a lot of the issues attendant to flashbangs. But when we talk about them, they are not innocuous. They're possibly one of the most dangerous weapons that are listed in the use of force. They've been most recently used by San Diego Police Department on September the 23rd downtown. It was used, officers said, because people were moving barricades, but that isn't what happened. They used it because someone was trying to take down the flag in front of San Diego Police Department. They threw a flashbang at somebody nearby them or at the person. I wasn't exactly sure at the time. Full disclosure, I was getting cokes for my team when this happened, and I just hear explosion. But from what I saw, from what my observers saw, the only reason they threw that was because somebody was taking down the American flag, which obviously wasn't destructive to property or a threat to human life or anything like that. They threw a flashbang at this person. So that's flashbangs. Next up is going to be tear gas. Tear gas, and I'm going to link again here. Bear with me a moment. This is a medical article on tear gas, and it details pretty much everything you've ever wanted to know about CS versus CN and tear gas. Here in San Diego, we use CS. And the problem with CS gas is that we don't know a lot about it. Most of the testing that's been done, and this is what's gone over in the article, most of the testing that's been done has been done on healthy young male soldiers, because that's where we most of the time are testing tear gas on them, is in training and boot camp. There isn't a lot of there isn't much of anything about tear gas effects on children, the elderly, the disabled, or women. They're not sure, but they are worried that it could cause miscarriages. What else is there? There's concern it could lead to lethal arrhythmias in people, cause permanent skin damage to children. And one thing to note is that CN gas used to be what tear gas was until it was switched to CS, because CS was found to be carcinogenic. CN was found to be carcinogenic, so that's why we switched to CS. But we don't know if CS is a carcinogen or not. The study just simply hasn't been done. Effectively, we're spraying chemicals on people, and we don't know what their effect is on people. So they're not necessarily safe. There is possible long-term damage, and especially against vulnerable populations. And that kind of will go over that. That article kind of really just goes over that in detail. And then finally, stinger grenades, to kind of answer your question of what a stinger grenade is, or sting balls as they refer to that in the document. So I just posted another link that is to the product specifications for a stinger grenade. and that will take you to exactly what it is. There are two formulations for a stinger grenade. One contains, well, three, two of which contain an irritant, one CS, one OC. The other one contains no irritant. The idea of a stinger grenade is, let's take that flashbang that I was talking about earlier. Now let's wrap CS gas around it. And then around that, let's wrap a bunch of small rubber pellets. That's what a stinger grenade is. It fires off these rubber pellets indiscriminately into a crowd surrounded by, at times, the irritant gas. I believe the kind that SDPD carries is the CS version, not the OC or non-irritant versions. And yeah, effectively, it is a flashbang mixed with tear gas, mixed with rubber bullets all at the outside. It is a nasty, nasty weapon. It was developed for prison riots. I cannot think of a single use against a crowd that would not cause the crowd to become more violent, not less. I cannot, for the life of me, I cannot think of a good time to use a stinger grenade except in a prison riot situation. And even then, it should be limited, because think about it. Leslie Furcron lost her eye in La Mesa due to a rubber bullet. This is a grenade of rubber bullets. There is no way for them to control where it's going or what it's doing, and it could easily hit somebody in the eye, go down their throat. There's 1,000 ways it could really, really injure someone. So I do think stingers need to be taken off the list entirely. Tear gas does present, the unfortunate reality of tear gas, despite the fact that we are spraying unknown chemicals on people effectively, is it is a very effective use of force. So I do think it would be a big ask to SDPD not to use that. But one thing I would say is, why not move that to where sting balls are on the list? When it comes down to imminent threat to the life of an officer, of a demonstrator, that's when we can talk about tear gas, I think. But sting balls, I just think, are an ineffective weapon for that specific purpose. The next thing about munitions that wasn't contemplated were spent munitions. How that's handled by law enforcement can make a really, really big difference. Right now, what they currently do with spent munitions is they send an officer out to grab it as quickly as possible after it explodes. It's what they did with the flashbang in front of the headquarters, effectively doing a snatch and grab on an inanimate object as opposed to a person. And that obviously puts officers in danger on the one hand. But the other issue is that protesters can come, they can pick them up. And so the question is how does SDPD handle spent munitions? Because they should not just pick them up, I don't think, because there needs to be some kind of an investigation documenting this is where it was fired, this is where it ended up. But at the same time, it needs to, go with the realities of what's going on in a protest and how wild these things can be. So let me see here. And another issue that came up in January is they declared unlawful assembly on one half of a protest, but not the other. So differentiating between protesters and counter-protesters, when to declare unlawful assembly to one side over the other, that's definitely something I want to definitely see in writing. Because from what I saw in January, there was no reason for them to declare unlawful assembly for one side, as both sides were actively engaging with each other. Going back to the bikes real quick, one of the issues that we're seeing at these demonstrations very often is demonstrators use follow cars. They use these vehicles that effectively carry disabled persons, medical equipment, food, water, etc. SDPD has been going after these follow cars. The Central Bike Team especially has been going after these follow cars with a fervor. And it's why there's been a lot of issues that have cropped up. A lot of the use of force incidents like the pepper spray incident in August downtown. That occurred because they stopped a follow car to give that follow car a ticket for running a red light as part of the demonstration, I believe. And most recently, about 2 weeks ago, there were 2 follow cars, and then the bike team rolled up on them. An arrest occurred as a result of that, though I'm not sure what the exact basis of the arrest was. It happened very, very quickly. But the point is that these follow cars do present a continuous issue that happens at protests all the time. And there needs to be some kind of policy regarding how they deal with them. Do they ticket them for every possible offense like they're doing now? Or do they allow them to use the vehicle as part of the demonstration on city streets? What about if the demonstration goes down a one-way road? These are actual things that have happened at these demonstrations, and there's nothing in the document that gives any guidance on what the central bike team is supposed to do with this. As a result, they've just been stopping the cars every single time they're able to. And the problem with that is then they have to form these ad hoc riot lines in the middle of the road with no preparation whatsoever. And then they start to use the bikes as weapons / riot shields, et cetera, et cetera. But if there was a policy on how to handle these follow cars, then we might be able to head a lot of these issues off at the pass. And then the final thing I'd like to talk about is officers not identifying themselves at these demonstrations is a catastrophe. I cannot stress this enough. This is one of the most disturbing things that I've ever seen at these demonstrations. The officers not giving out their names, saying that they're giving out their numbers. When I was in Pacific Beach in January, how they handled their ID numbers on them was they had a piece of duct tape over where their name tag would be, and it would just be 4 numbers. How do I know if those 4 numbers are actually their ID numbers? There's no possible way for me to know. They could write anything they want on this duct tape. More recently, they've had actual badges, printed metal badges with their ID numbers. That is an improvement, certainly, but it's still not good enough. A good example of an issue we've had with officers not giving out their name was on December, I forget the exact time, I think it was 16th. I can get the exact date for you in a bit, but there was a demonstration at San Diego Police Department headquarters. It was coming up on the 10 o'clock curfew. All the officers switch on their body-worn cameras. I noticed that there's all the officers in the front are all 1 or 2 stars. There's a sergeant in the back. He's the one who's giving orders. I asked the officers on the line, what is your sergeant's name that's giving the orders? They won't tell me. I ask multiple officers on the line. They don't tell me. I get every one of my observers to ask officers on the line who that one sergeant is, to give me an ID number or a name or something. I can't get to him because he's behind the line, right? They won't give any information on the person who was in charge that night. I tried to, using my monocular, I tried to actually just see his badge because he had his badge on. But then he got his baton and moved it in front of his badge, so that I couldn't see that. It's killer. It not only is it killer to the trust, but our whole job as legal observers is to determine who did what when. And I can't do that if I don't know who the individual officers are. And that's the problem with them not giving their names out. And they say their concern is that their officers are being doxxed by protesters, but CopWatch already has every officer's name and badge number and salary posted publicly. They're not protecting themselves from nearly anything by doing this. And what they're doing is they are decreasing community trust. And if something does happen at one of these demonstrations, I won't know who did it. I won't know who did it. None of my people will know who did it. And again, this is all we do. This is our whole job at these demonstrations, is just to notate who did what. And if we're unable to do that, then there's no accountability. So I think that kind of covers most of the stuff I wanted to go over.
Sorry, I was on mute and I was also taking quite a bit of notes. On the identifying thing, I thank you for bringing that up, because as you said that, I realized the current policy does require that if you were to ask me as an officer, I have to give you my name and ID number, but it doesn't specify that I have to tell you who my commanding officer is. So I think, to your point, that's an area where if you're asking for someone who is 20 feet behind you, who's the commanding officer at the scene, the policy now, at least the way I read it, doesn't really apply to that situation. So I made a note of that we can talk about that as well. Thank you so much for that very detailed summary. I know obviously you spent a lot more time probably at protests than probably almost anyone else here. Like I said, I took quite a bit of notes, and so I might reach out to you to try to clarify anything if I have any questions later. What I'd like to do is I'd like to go to Alex, and then after that we can go to kind of a community roundtable questions. And then for both you, Kylie, and Alex and Kate, I think if we can have questions asked of any of us, we could try to provide answers at least for what we have. But Kate, do you want to officially introduce Alex?
Oh, it's my honor. Alex Landon is one of the premier criminal defense attorneys in San Diego, one of the founders of the San Diego chapter of the Guild, and my go-to person whenever I want to know anything about criminal law, and especially the rights of demonstrators. And he has been involved in representing demonstrators and political people for many, many years, including Occupy, including now. And he's just a star in my book. So I've asked Alex to look at the policy from both the perspective of a person who represents demonstrators, and also, since he's also a member of the ACLUs, from a First Amendment perspective. Alex.
Thank you. Okay. The first thing, which may be obvious, is that I believe that action speaks louder than words. So in reviewing the words, obviously I see some good words there. The question is, how will they play out with respect to action? The other thing that came to mind is the hiring policy of the San Diego PD and law enforcement agencies in general, the education of the officers, and the training. And I make a distinction between the education and the training. So when looking at the actual policy on First Amendment activity, it correctly cites to the United States Constitution and to the California Constitution with respect to the right to protest, basically the right to assemble, the right to express oneself. And to me, that's where we start, because that sets the bar under which we cannot go. It's a minimal standard, and if, for instance, the local policy or the state law sets a level below that standard, then it's going to lose. In other words, then it violates, in effect, the higher standard of the United States Constitution or the state of California Constitution. And where the California Constitution gives more than the US Constitution, then people have a right to have that enforced. So I was looking at, for instance, one of the comments about unlawful assembly. And obviously this is something that comes up in demonstrations as to when is there an unlawful assembly. And I noted that there was a comment about the term boisterous in the code. And that's true. It's listed there in the code. And it's in the penal code as opposed to just being a part of some type of administrative policy. So for something like that, there's a good example where technically, I don't think that you can set a policy that takes boisterous away because it's a part of the code. On the other hand, you certainly can set a policy that dictates how you follow the law, or how you interpret the law, or how you make sure that the law is being respected. And that's where, discretion comes into play. Those of us who've been around San Diego for a long time are very familiar with the concept of an attitude arrest. I think that we're better today than we were certainly when I started practicing. And I think that there have been advancements in the area of community-based policing and things of that nature, but you still see the reality that officers using their discretion are involved in what I would consider to be attitude arrest. These are cases that are situations where probably it will not result in someone actually being charged with a crime. Because as you probably know, officers don't charge people with crimes. The office of the city attorney or the district attorney's office, those are the people who actually charge people with crimes. Officers can cite people or arrest people for an alleged crime, but they don't file crimes, and it's not within their jurisdiction to do so. But they certainly can make life miserable for somebody if they create an attitude arrest with an idea many times that they know this thing is probably not going to go anywhere in the courts. And we know in the court system that there are a goodly number, I can't give you the exact percentage, you'd have to check with the city attorney's office and the DA's office, but a goodly number of cases that come to them where they do not file. And these attitude arrest situations are the ones that pick it up. The other part about this is that having been involved in litigation around the jails here in San Diego, I can tell you that because of overcrowding, we had a situation where the San Diego Police Department was in effect ordered, along with other law enforcement agencies, they were ordered to use their ability to cite release on misdemeanors. So there are a few specific misdemeanors, for instance, like domestic violence, being under the influence, drunk driving, where if the individual is found alleged to be involved with that crime, they will be taken into custody. But for most misdemeanors, the police are supposed to cite release that individual and not take them to jail. And certainly if they do take them to jail, the watch commander there should be releasing them. But one of the things that will keep a person in is being charged with Penal Code Section 148, or interfering with a police officer during the performance of their duties. And that's something that obviously is used with respect to this attitude arrest concept that I was talking about. And so those are types of things where an officer is given the discretion to make that call in the field. And their supervisor may drop the case down the road, or a prosecutor may drop the case down the road. But for the moment, that individual is going into custody, and that individual has been, in my opinion, restrained against their rights. And that's an important issue. So that whole concept of discretion and how do you deal with that, to me, is part and parcel of the concept of hiring the right people, educating the officers once they've been hired, and training the officers once they have been hired and are about to be a part of the police community and doing their job. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that I think it's good, obviously, is that there's mention in your section, not your, but in the section on the policy on the First Amendment, I believe it's 6B, which talks about the way the police should act. And there are a couple of words that are in there, and one of them is professional, and the other one is courteous. And to me, when I talk to individuals who are potential demonstrators or people who want to exercise their rights, I have to tell them that, in my opinion, that the police are expected to be professional and the police are expected to be courteous. But there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case. And we certainly can hope for that. We should, in my opinion, expect that of those people that we have on our force. But the reality is that that's something that needs to be dealt with. Once again, is that just lip service? Are those just words, or will actions speak louder than words? And that's, to me, a very important aspect of this policy, because if it's merely words and we're just going to go back to business as usual, that doesn't help anybody. We will continue to have the problems that we have had. And in the criminal justice system, it's an expensive proposition. For the taxpayers, it's a money impact. But for the individuals who are involved and their families and their community, it's something greater than that. So if it violates the United States Constitution and it violates the state constitution, then that's something that we should expect needs to be corrected. And again, I'm not convinced that these policies will correct that unless some of those other aspects are put into play. And that's basically what I have to say. So I'm available for some questions or comments if you want, but I think that I've said what I want to say.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alex. I see we have one hand up, and we're almost exactly on time, which is great. What I'm thinking of doing is, if we have like anyone who's an attendee, if you use the raise hand feature within Zoom, what I'll do is I will call on people in order, and then I can allow you guys to talk, and then you can ask your question. So Doug, I see yours is up as well, but Derek had his hand up first. So Derek, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
I'm sorry, that was a mistake. I didn't intend to raise my hand.
Okay.
I'm enjoying this.
Then Doug, it's over to you now.
Okay, I have 3 questions, one for Alex, and it's good to see Alex. I don't know if you remember me, Alex, but I was on the ACLU board in the 1980s. We were active together, and it's good to see you again. The question of on body-worn cameras prior to the Declaration of an Unlawful Assembly. We think it would be a good idea to be able to document that. The department is hesitant to do that because they think that they'll be criticized for trying to document the protesters. And so I wanted to get your opinion on that. So let me ask that question first, then I have 2 questions for Kylie.
Okay. Again, obviously you've asked an interesting question, because those who suffer from what I call healthy paranoia are concerned about what those cameras are going to document. But obviously the body worn camera, I think the positives outweigh the negatives as long as they're not misused. So I'm a firm believer in having these things documented. And I don't like it when the Rosemary Woods moments occur and all of a sudden the body worn camera is either not operating or turned off or something of that nature. So that's another separate issue. But I guess that I would say that the pluses outweigh the minuses. And as long as there's a policy that prohibits the misuse of the body worn camera data, then I think it's a good thing. And so I think in answer to your question, I would encourage that if the police are going to be in a situation where it would be difficult to figure out when to turn it on or when not to turn it on, then why not have it on the whole time?
Okay, thank you. And then Kylie, 2 questions. First, there is a section in the policy that talks about the media and their right to be present and document. And you made a distinction between legal observers and the media, but it seems to me that there ought to be something in the document that recognizes that legal observers have the right to be there and should not be required to disperse if there's an unlawful assembly. And so my question is, should there be something in the policy that gives legal observers the right to remain after the unlawful assembly has been declared? And then secondly, you can elaborate more on the use of bicycles as weapons, because I'm not familiar with that. And if you can explain exactly how they use them as weapons, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, so, oh goodness. Alex, could you mute yourself?
Sure.
And then you. First of all, the use of bicycles as weapons. I'm not sure what kind of clarification are you looking for there, Doug?
Well, how exactly do they use them as weapons? I've never seen them.
They grab them. If you want to, there's quite a lot of video of it running around, and I have plenty of video as well I can show you. But effectively what they do is they grab the bicycle by the frame and by the rear wheel or around that area, and they just push into them. And the exact order that Tyler Doherty gives, that's the sergeant in charge of that team, Tyler Doherty. The exact order is mobile side back, whatever that means. And so what'll happen is Tyler will yell, "Mobile side back, move!" And then all of the officers will push forward with their bikes and say, "Get back!" And so that's kind of the standard way that they do that. They also move not as a line as well, sometimes just push while still on the line and not when moving forward. And I'm sorry, what was your second question again?
The second question is whether there should be something in the policy that recognizes the right of legal observers present even after a full assembly has been declared.
Okay. And so there could be some utility in having something in there, at least documenting that legal observers are non-participants. But the reality of the matter is that legally speaking, legal definition, we don't really fall under the media, and we don't fall under a participant. We don't fall under law enforcement. The closest thing we fall under is a non-participant or a bystander. I've already instructed my team based on the case law that non-participants are fine at these demonstrations. According to the case law that I have, it's old case law. It's from the 60s. Is referring to a riot in Santa Barbara. But it is that non-participants in an unlawful assembly cannot be arrested for unlawful assembly or force used against them, at least in theory. It would this case would still need to be tested, as it were. It would be a novel case. And one other thing, I did want to respond to your question for Alex. The police are already recording these events and demonstrators know it. They have plainclothes officers. One particular officer likes to follow in a silver Dodge Caravan, and they will film from, they will be filming using full-on video cameras. So they're already filming these demonstrations. A body-worn camera, the only worry I have with them turning on their body testers do react to that red light. They say, oh, you turned on your body-worn camera. What are you going to do now? You know, so there needs to be some kind of uniform way that it is used so that it's not, so it doesn't incite a protester effectively. But again, they're already recording these events.
That's interesting because their policy seems to imply that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. What's the general attitude of the SDPD toward the Lawyers Guild legal orders?
We've had 5 separate injuries occur so far. 3 of our observers have had to go to the doctor's office already. Specifically, our one black legal observer was the most injured. They beat her with a bike, threw her to the ground, and pepper sprayed her twice at one event. At the most recent event we were at 2 weeks ago, our one observer who was in training, an officer ran into her with her bike or pushed her. It's an officer that we've been having a number of issues with, a Stephanie Maciel. And so this particular officer has been documented using excessive force on on a few occasions, I believe, certainly at least one that I documented. But yeah, that officer did hit my newest member 2 weeks ago. Her injuries were minor though. But Narelle, who is the black observer back in August who got really hurt, she definitely had to go to the doctor, and she still has some issues with her knee. At one demonstration, one of my coordinators got hit with a baton, and at another, he specifically got jabbed in the chest. And then at that same demonstration, they also pushed down another one of my coordinators. And I'm forgetting one injury, but generally speaking, to answer your question, generally speaking, they try to leave us alone. But if we are anywhere close to being anywhere in the way, they will move us. I don't feel like we're being specifically targeted yet. Like I do think some members of the media are being targeted at these events. There's a particular reporter, a James Stout, who's been targeted multiple times. But no, so we haven't been targeted, but they have no problem hurting us.
And then the final question, if I can, Brendan, as the committee moves and we get the complaints regarding protest, and it's a protest where an NG, National Lawyers Guild legal observer has been present, is there a way to find out whether or not there was a legal observer and to request that they provide information to the investigation?
So whenever a use of force occurs, and I ask for my team to write declarations on what happened, and so they write declarations under penalty of perjury, and those are ready to go for pretty much any use of force that has occurred at a demonstration that we've been at. We're at most of them, so generally speaking, if it's a demonstration you can ask. There are some that we haven't been able to go to. We only go to a demonstration if we are explicitly invited by an event organizer, and there are times that we aren't invited to these demonstrations. But for the most part, we are there. We do have declarations. If a use of force or an arrest occurred, we will almost certainly have a declaration and video.
Okay, investigator could contact the guild and see if they have a declaration for that particular incident.
Yeah, it'd be best to contact through me, but you could also go through Kate as well.
Okay. That's good. No, thank you.
I want to try to be able to get to the community members as well. So I'm going to switch back over. There's two I think that I'm aware of. Evie, I think you're first. You can go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? I don't have really, yeah, okay.
Yep,
I-
yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I have a few little questions. One is that I see in your suggestions that there is the and or for the name badge, or the badge, whether it has a name or a number. Seems to me the ones I've seen on police have both. And there's no reason, I can't see any reason why both shouldn't be there. I know it's a lot easier to remember a name than a number. And if I had a quick involvement with an officer, I would be more likely to remember at least part of the name than I would a number correctly. So I don't know that it should be an or. First of all, the name also humanizes the person rather than the number. Numbers are never a good way to look at another person. So I would just suggest that they be required to wear the regular badge that has a name and a number.
So if I can quickly answer that. So the reason why I said and or is because the policy changes when the incident commander decides that, given the situation, that officers then no longer have to provide their name. They only have to provide their ID number. So that's why I had the and or, because it depends on the situation. So I think initially it starts off, they have to provide their name and ID number. And then if things escalate, an incident commander can decide that then only the IDs can be provided.
Why would that be a decision? Why are they hiding who they are? If there is a number they know, but other people can't know who they are?
I mean, I can't really explain why the department did it, but I think Kylie brought it up as a really good point. Is it's the department has said that they're concerned that officers are being doxxed and their personal details are being spread on the internet. That's the reason why they made that modification to the policy. When I made the comment, I was just kind of following within what already exists. I mean, me personally, I think I've reviewed complaints that have come in where someone even says, like, I don't even know what officer it is, but it happened on this date at this time. And usually you can still try to find out who that officer is. But it's a valid point. I mean, I don't disagree with your assessment, but that's what the current policy is.
Okay, well, I would kind of suggest to them that if they're as a human being, that their name should be known, and anybody can be found who wants, you know, if someone wants to find somebody, they can. I mean, Kylie said that there are lists out of them anyway that are available, and I've seen one, so it tells a lot about them. So, you know, Kylie, did you want to make a comment? I saw Kylie.
All I want to say is, like I said, to this day, I still do not know who that sergeant was that December 9th.
Yeah, and you should. Okay, the other is, there's something in there about things that are being thrown, and that the response to what's being thrown should be something in an equal response to what's being thrown at them, to what they do back. I mean, some way of sort of juggling that. Do you remember that comment in there? It's not in your comments. I read through the thing this afternoon, and it stood out that I wondered, when there was a riot and then there was some real force from the police, when they said that, well, they were throwing rocks and I forget what else, bottles at them, water bottles or something like that. But there is this general thing in there about projectiles, and I think there needs to be some examples, like what is going to be a quote acceptable and what not. Someone wads up a piece of paper and throws it at an officer. Is there going to be some reason that officer can get over there and arrest them for throwing something at him? So if you find that in their whole protest list, there might be some way of explaining that projectile thing a little better. And then the other thing is, I wonder what determines who they send out to these. Like what officers are sent out to protest? Are there some that are trained? Is it anyone available? Maybe there should be some specific people who would do better at handling those things and others, especially if there is a training on all this new stuff before they go out. So I would suggest maybe that there be some information about, at least told to us, who goes out on these. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to stay on public. Christina, you are up.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Griffin-Jones. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I wanted to ask how much input actual protesters have had in this policy. Because like that's a problem. So I or a friend of mine was at a protest. They used those nifty little terrible flash bomb things. Police officers were in army fatigues. There was pepper spray. There was no warning. There was the only people following the law were not the police officers. So, and then also I'm really concerned because people are talking about in a fantastical way about police officers ever being in danger at any protest that has happened, which is absolute, it's just not true, you all. Police officers have been causing havoc at all of the protests that's been done for Black lives and for any non-Trump white life. Like protesters have been harmed by police. A lot of us, we don't even make the distinction of peaceful protests anymore, because when community members who look like me, I'm a Black woman, when we're at protests, we know that it's going to be peaceful. It starts to not become peaceful when police are there, because the police who are there, they're always terrible. They're always recording everything. It's just like, I'm on the side that there needs to be no police at protests. Something also really concerning is that increased police presence, it scares businesses. And those businesses closed down. So if y'all remember in Barrio Logan, when the National Guard was called, right? Liquor stores closed down because they thought that a riot was going to happen. Like those liquor stores were closed, so people couldn't get food that night. Like, so it's just like police officers, they don't need to be at protests. And this policy is worrisome and terrible. And it needs to be abolished, and it needs to be brought back to community members or people who go to protests like me to review. Because like, you know, it's just we've seen this summer, and like we also saw with the insurrection, right? January 6th, we know that police officers are more prepared to protect white people and property. What police officers don't like to protect is Black, Indigenous, people of color, folks who identify like as poor, you know. So yeah, I think that this policy is dangerous. I think that we do have to start off with a policy, and this is a body that could host something like that, where you have people who are survivors of San Diego protests, because as we know, like going to protests with police is like, it definitely is fatal. So yeah, I think this group should encourage community to come together and to create a policy, and then that policy be brought in front of police. The police are going to say no, because it doesn't give them the freedom to do and be and be terrible. But the community coming together to do something like that would be really important, because unfortunately you all, as someone who loves going to protests, will continue to go to protests. This doesn't look safe or fun for me. And I also worry a lot too about our Black loved ones who also identify as LGBTQ plus and B, because me as a cis Black woman, like, I'm not safe. So I know that my Black, non-binary, and trans loved ones won't be safe anyway, like be safe at all with a policy like this. So those are my concerns, you all. And I think this is the body that could get community members together, get people from protests and people who've put in complaints together to come up with something better. And it also shouldn't be the police who've been causing havoc and harm this whole summer to come up with something to keep the people they've been terrorizing safe. So thank you for that. Thank you for this space.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for sharing your feedback. So kind of going to your first question, when the department was creating this policy, you asked, was the community, and especially people who have been at protests, have they been solicited for feedback? No, they weren't. What we had done is we realized, at the time at the CRB, we realized that San Diego Police Department did not have a policy that directed protest-related activity. So we were a little bit more proactive. We went out and we looked at what other cities around the country were doing. We felt there were certain cities that had kind of the best practices. And so we took those to the department and said, hey, we want to see you guys create something. And then, obviously what we're doing now is we're providing feedback on what their first policy was. So I mentioned this at the protest meeting, the policy meeting we had before. It's kind of like our body worn camera policy. We made multiple revisions to that policy to get it to a place that is somewhere where I think the community expects it to be. And I anticipate the protest policy will be the same. I would anticipate we're going to be probably making multiple changes, over the next months and years. But I made a note of several of your comments, and we'll be moving forward on that one. Next one up is Darwin. Should be able to talk.
All right, thank you. Good evening. Darwin Fishman, Racial Justice Coalition, Equity and Justice Coalition, North County. I'm really glad to see you guys doing this through our civilian oversight. I was worried that actually was a done deal when I heard the public announcement that the police had come up with a new protest policy and that was going to be it. I would just add, Christina said, as someone that also comes out to a whole lot of demos, I'm really worried about this policy, especially since the main thing that the press seemed to focus on was the fact that the police don't have to disclose their ID, or to the extent they do, it's through their badge number, which really, of course, for most folks is not going to be useful at all. And I've been to many demos where police have actually covered up their badge purposely. And I know enough officers, current and retired, to know that there is a culture with some police forces that demos are like free time. You can do what you want to do to whoever because there's no accountability. So the part I would just like to add is, this is really nice, but I hope that there's also an examination of the simple thing of, have there ever been any officers in San Diego Police Force that have ever been disciplined for what they've done in a demo? If you have, for example, a whole lot of complaints for demos, 30, 40, 50, whatever, has there been any officers that have been disciplined for what they've done at demos? And I've been at more than enough demos to not only see, of course, officers act out because it can have really tense situations, but also protesters. But those protesters I know are ones that have gotten things like felony resisting arrests. What I don't know, and I've never heard of, is any officer that, for example, loses it and just starts, for example, beating on someone with a club has ever been disciplined for that. Whether or not they, break their neck, break their leg, or anything else. So this is good, but I hope there's an equal part put into accountability and ensuring that if you actually pass any things about policy and what they should not do in demos, that there's actually a part about how do you actually enforce it? Who's responsible for this? And what are the mechanisms in place to make sure there's actually accountability for what the officers do? Thank you.
All right, thanks, Darwin. Now I'm going to move back over to the commission. Robin, you're up first, and then Kate, you're next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks everyone for especially community coming in and sharing your voices. It's really important for us to hear that, and we appreciate you saying it. Thank you. This is sort of dovetailing on something that Alex and Evie touched on, and I'm wondering if it's ever appropriate, I don't know, I'm new to the commission, to include some sort of mandate for training in the policy. Because my understanding from what I've been reading and learning a little bit is that the police department is, I mean, a great example is they didn't have a protest policy, right? They're sort of figuring out who to put in these places and how it's going to look. And I think that they're bringing in officers, you know, from different areas who've not worked together before, and it certainly could use, I would assume, specific training on how to deal or be in a protest situation. Specifically, I think when we're talking, I've heard some words from folks tonight about the use of body-worn camera and also de-escalation, specifically in these more crowd-based situations. And I'm just wondering if that would ever be possible to put into a policy. It certainly, I think, feels probably to a lot of folks who are listening in as a Band-Aid, but I think it would be something to consider, is sort of some really, before you are put into a position where you're going to be policing a protest. So just something to think about, because I know, for example, they've been using a lot of plainclothes officers as well, who don't have the same body-worn camera requirements that uniformed officers do. So things like that, if that could be wrapped up into a training. Just a question, I guess, is that ever happened? And if not, would it be possible, or is that not appropriate to put into a policy, recommended policy? I don't know.
Could I make a comment about that? My sense is that the police have all kinds of special units. Obviously, everybody's familiar with some of them, and we have a special unit, for instance, that deals with mental health issues now, where there are specialists that go with the police. Why couldn't we have a special unit that, you know, from the police department that was trained in the Constitution and recognized the rights that people do have, to ensure that that's what we get, you know, with respect to the protest. One of the things that I didn't talk about, but is a concern, is how to deal with, for instance, peaceable civil disobedience. You know, how do you deal with the situation where someone is being peaceful but is intent on making a statement? And how do you deal with that situation? And we've seen both sides of that, where the police have been very understanding, and other times where they have not. So I think that that's something that we need to look at. And also, how do you deal with something that certain people believe is an unlawful assembly and others don't think it's an unlawful assembly? And how do you make that decision? And if you do make that decision, then one of the areas that the people in my community who are representing individuals who wind up getting arrested have to deal with is, you know, was there really a clear, understandable opportunity to respond to this this command that this is now an unlawful assembly, and is there really a way to disperse? And Kylie mentioned, obviously, the reaction to police using certain weaponry and what that does, as opposed to dispersing people, it creates havoc. So I think those are all aspects that would be appropriate if you had. I mentioned professional, and I mentioned the idea that professional and courteous were supposed to be part of this policy. But again, if they're just words, they don't mean anything. But if you have a special unit that's been trained and understands what the obligations are, maybe you'd actually be able to put that into the process.
I think this Joe person is waving, but I did want to say something.
Oh, I didn't even see that. Robin, are you good with that?
Yeah, good.
Yes, and I think it's a good idea. I think we should
Okay.
have trainings.
Well, I wasn't sure if you had more questions. Is
No,
what
I
I was
just
getting
raised
at
my
there.
hand there. I was asking a question, but kind of trying to make a point. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Joe, before I go to you, Kate has had her hand up for a while, so I want to go to Kate first, and then Joe, I'll come to you.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I had a number of things that I wanted to talk about. One is, I think that it is important that we have this special policy because I think it gives criminal defense attorneys and civil rights attorneys and the commission something else to look at when there's this kind of police misconduct, instead of, you know, the police just being able to use the sort of standard stuff that they always use. And that's why I think it's important that this policy be a lot stronger and a lot clearer on a lot of things. I think Christina and others raised the issues of, and Brandon acknowledged, there has been no community input. That's the first thing that jumped out at me when I saw that this was happening. I had heard that there was something going on, and I actually tried to contact Chief Nislight on several occasions, and he ignored me. I'm kind of used to that, but I thought that was pretty rude. Clearly the police department does not want community input on this. I'm glad to hear that the commission took this in hand and contacted the ACLU and the NAACP. I don't know if they had any input in this or not, but I think, and so, you know, when I frankly talked with the commission, and Brandon and the commission agreed to have this community roundtable, and maybe we need more. This was kind of on short notice. So I'm glad to see that we have, I think, 25 participants, but I'd really like to have 100. I would like to have a lot more people from the community talking about this, but I think it's also important to hear what the sort of lawyer side of us need in this. And that's why I think a policy is important. And a couple things that I want to talk about the whole body worn camera issue that Alex referred to. He talked about demonstrators having a healthy paranoia about being filmed by the police. We have a long history with that. We have a long history in San Diego, for those of you who don't know, about police having what used to be called the Red Book on demonstrators, where they were keeping tabs on us. They were, I mean, supposedly that was gone after Lansdowne came in, but San Diego has a long history of keeping a book, keeping surveillance on demonstrators. I mean, you know, I have personal experience with that. I know that my phone has been tapped on occasion by the police department. I've had police driving up and down my street, not recently, but earlier, like in 2000, when there were a lot of demonstrations going on. So, you know, to say that we have a healthy paranoia, there's a reason for that. And we know that that's happening. So I do agree with Alex that I think body worn cameras should be turned on, but I also think that the retention policy should be really strong, that it should clearly say that that demonstrators, that it is not used to identify demonstrators or to, you know, I'm going to say put us in any kind of book or something or something like that, and that it should be thrown out. I don't think it should even be kept for 30 days. If there's nothing going on, then I don't think it should be. I think the policy about not retaining it should be very strong. That's a really important thing for demonstrators, as you know, as far as what is kept for us. The other thing that nobody talked about, and I'll talk again about healthy paranoia again, and this goes back for many years through the National Lawyers Guild, is police infiltrators and police who are actually provocateurs in demonstrations. And I think that needs to be absolutely banned. I think it needs to be very clear that there should not be any undercover people. There should not be any officers who aren't in uniform and don't self-identify as officers who are at demonstrations. I mean, I can give you many stories of times that we as legal observers have identified police who were undercover and followed them, and they've tried to get away from us and all those kind of stories. So that is something else that I think we need to be clear about. The other thing about legal observers in particular, I think Doug asked whether the policy should say that legal observers are not part of a dispersal order. I think it should be a bit more than that, because there is also a history, as Kylie has said. Well, maybe legal observers aren't targeted, but how is it that legal observers get so injured when it's clear that legal observers are not demonstrators, that we are simply not bystanders, but not participants. So I think it needs to be clear that not only are legal observers not part of the dispersal order, that we can stay around, that we are not to be arrested. We have been arrested. We have had what we're using to observe with, whether it's a camera or whether it's notes or whatever, taken from us and not returned to us. I have had police officers take out of my hand, when I've been taking notes, take out of my hand and shred notes that I have made. So those kinds of things, I think, need to be part of the policy. It need to be part of the training that I don't know that we should be as particularly like a protected class, but I think it needs to be clear that we are not to be targeted and we're to be left alone. And let's see if I had other notes. I think that was kind of it on the notes that I had that I wanted to add to that. I think that I also think, and maybe we could hear from Doug and Brandon about how I want the community to understand whether or not this policy that the police department has put out is like a done deal, or whether it really can be changed, modified, whether they really will take our input. So that's what I want to hear from the CPP, because I had asked that at a prior meeting and there was a response to that. Like, why are we doing this if it's really a done deal and nobody and the police don't care anymore? I know the commission cares, but so that's my question to the commission. Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to address a couple things, because a couple of people brought up the point of the notice for the meeting. So I want to explain why. I mean, yes, it was a little bit short notice. The reason why I wanted to do this is we did have our policy committee meeting, and the way that the commission works is the policy committee will make a recommendation, we'll vote on that, and then we take it to the full commission to review it, debate it, and then vote upon that. And then once it's approved by the commission, I, as chair, will write a memo to the chief of police with what our recommendations are. So the reason why it's a little bit on the shorter side of the notice is that open meeting is on Tuesday. So I wanted to have this meeting happen prior to that, so I could propose the suggestions that the policy committee had. And I'm also going to bring the feedback that we've come up with at this roundtable. And then that way, what we can do is we can hopefully have the whole full commission approve those recommendations, and we'll send that over. I'll be completely honest and open about this. That recommendation is not going to have everything that we talked about here today, because that didn't go to the policy committee. But that being said, I'm still going to share all those pieces of information that I've collected here today, and we can make multiple recommendations, and most likely will. So we've committed to our memo is, it's going to go pretty much to everyone at City Council, the mayor's office, the chief of police. It's going to go on our website. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the police department could choose to do nothing. They could choose to ignore all of our recommendations. It's a possibility. Theoretically, that is their choice. But in history, we found that they are usually pretty responsive. And if they don't do something, they'll usually tell us, we're not going to do, your recommendations, 4, 5, and 6, here's why. So, there is a lot that can be done. Like I said, with the body worn camera policy, the former CRB, we made a lot of recommendations to make changes, to make that policy much more clear, much more enforceable. And Doug could probably correct me on this. I want to say we probably made 6 rounds of revisions to make that policy to where it is today, and maybe even more. So I do think the department is willing to hear what our feedback is. Like I said, I can't guarantee they're going to do everything we ask, but they have said they are committed to hear our feedback, and they want to work with us to make something that is enforceable. And it also, it works for the community, it works for the police department. So we're definitely going to be trying to move forward on that. So like I said, I do expect this next memo that we hopefully do sometime next week, that'll be the first pass. And there will most likely be additional ones that come up in the future. Doug, do you want to chime in on that? Yeah.
Can I add to that? I know Joe's next, but I just want to add to that. I think that you said that this is going to go to all the city council members, and realistically, we should probably follow up with Council Member Monica Montgomery Stepp and the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee, because they're the ones who can make policy and can really work on the police department if they're not going to go anywhere on their own. So, we as a community need to think about that through CPAT or through other groups or organizations that we belong to.
Is there any reason, Brandon, why we can't make amendment to the proposal that comes before the commission next Tuesday? So in others, we have the recommendations we talked about at our last meeting, but there's a lot of things that came up here today that I think should be included. Can we, when that's presented, make a motion to add things to that list?
Yes, we can. Typically in the past, what we've done is we'll have policy do that first, and then it moves forward. To be honest, what I would like to see is I would like to see at least our recommendations get started, even if this is the first pass, because I would hate to wait another month and then essentially have a month or two before the department starts to make any changes. So yeah, I think we can definitely try to include some of these. Some of them I think are easier. I think obviously the full commission has to vote to do that. We'll probably take them line by line to approve. But yeah, Doug, I think you're right. We can definitely do that.
Okay, expect a long amendment Tuesday. Thank you.
And then Joe,
am I next?
You are up.
Well, first of all, Kate, I think that quite frankly, the timing is good with the police department. When this goes to our commission, I feel very confident that it's going to be very well received, and it will probably come out the way that we want it. And by going to the police department, in my opinion, if this was 2 years ago, I don't think we would have much of a chance to have a change. But times have changed, and I think the timing now is perfect. So, and I really have to applaud the work that the policy committee has done, is to be able to bring this forward. So we need this action, and we need to get it done. There's also one thing that I want to share that I was paying very, very close attention to what Kylie had to say. I had no idea that we had someone like that, and I think a lot of things that she mentioned, and that we can certainly. And I think Doug alluded to this, that if we could maybe tighten up, Brandon, some of the issues that was brought up, because I think they're very, very important. Because every time that we go through this, we get smarter, and we have more good ideas. But again, we need to get it started. We need to get this moving. The other thing that I have a little concern, a lot of concern with, is the other side. The police are there to go ahead and protect the looting and property and so on. And I'm a little concerned that the other side, the protesters, the bad protesters, not the peaceful protesters, but they have weapons that they use, bear spray, which is in the news a lot. They also have pepper spray and so on, rocks, bottles, cocktails that are very, 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 very dangerous. So there's got to be some type of a balance to that, because the police officers that are there to protect property and lives, they need to have some type of a counter to go ahead and protect not only themselves but also the property. So those are the concerns that and because there's one thing that we're here is there's one side of all of this is that it's not giving any type of opinion, and that's the police department. And so that's that's something that I would like to hear and be concerned, because I want to be fair to both sides. So I guess that's my opinion. Brandon,
If I could respond to a couple of things that Joe said. So the first thing is the use of bear spray and pepper spray specifically has been more confined to the right-wing protesters than left-wing demonstrators for the most part. I'm not saying it's never happened from the left-wing demonstrators, but that's where it tends to be confined. Joe, I do think that if we look at this, if the most peaceful protests I've ever been to are the ones where police have not been present at all, to a point where I was actually concerned, Joe. There was one demonstration back, I believe in June. They had no police presence whatsoever for about a crowd of 400 people marching downtown. I was worried cars were going to start driving into them and things like that. But that was the most peaceful protest that I've ever been to in San Diego. It was easily the best one. And I think the reason why is because you didn't have law enforcement escalating the situation. And that's kind of the point that I was really kind of trying to drive home, is that the police are not non-participants in this. The police, their actions affect what the crowd does. The crowd doesn't do this in a vacuum. They don't start throwing rocks and bottles like in Pacific Beach until there's already a riot line that's already formed and is advancing. I haven't ever seen them just start throwing things at the police just to start throwing things at the police. It's always been in response to something. So that's what I would say to that.
well, I totally agree. But what I'm concerned with is the copycats. That what we've seen on TV constantly is what happened at the Capitol, and then these agitators, the real bad agitators that infiltrate the peaceful protesters, then start to use these types of, I would refer to them as weapons or so on. The police have to have some way to go ahead and counter that, because in a peaceful demonstration, as you know and probably observe, that the police are there to stop traffic, to be able to make sure that the streets are clear, that they have full access, and basically are there to really protect them just from the traffic. So I guess that's the least escalation, but is what we get into, and what we're discussing a lot here right now, is when those agitators infiltrate the peaceful demonstrators that cause the problems and cause the police to be able, because they try, I assume that the police try to identify the bad ones from the good ones, but that's very hard. That's extremely hard to do. So there is no. Now, as far as you and your organization being there, I am firmly in support of that. I think that you should be there, and you should, and I'm sure that you probably have some type of a either a sweater or something to identify yourself. But the police need to know that and be able to understand, because I'm totally in agreement with the support of that. And Kate, your point about tearing up notes and stuff like that is totally inappropriate. Oh my gosh. And I think that goes back to training. I think that the more training that the police officers can do, that also I feel confident. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel confident that once that our proposal goes to the full commission, and the commission then takes it to the police department, we are going to get some type of an action. We may not get everything, but it was if you remember, Kate, going back to the karate hold, when we first went to the police department with that, we got nowhere. But however, then there was a time when it was right, and then we finally got that in. So we are going to continue to press on this, because we think this is important. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
Okay, there are a couple of attendees that have comments. Christina, you're up first, and then Ian. Christina, give me 1 second. There you go. Should be allowed to talk.
Cool. Chair, well, like I would want to, because I want to be respectful, Joe, because I don't know if you're following the chat, but there was a lot of, I think, I'll speak from definitely triggered in some of the language that you use to talk about, protesters, and also to talk about the police needing additional protection. And I put in the chat, I put no, Joe. And then I was asked to be respectful by Chair Brandon, which I also feel a whole lot of sad feelings about, Chair Brandon, because like I put in the chat, right? You are not the police. Don't police the chat. And this is a public meeting where discourse and disagreement is allowed. And my comments, concern, or disagreement shouldn't be taken as disrespectful. In fact, it's a form of respect, showing that I don't agree with something being said about me. You all, I think it's super important. I know that you have a deadline to make on Tuesday, but I think you all really have the opportunity to try to have maybe another emergency meeting like this, giving community organizers like myself and other people on this call a chance to get other community members to review this, community members who've like been on the front lines, and we see the type of protection, support, and collaboration to our detriment, y'all, that the San Diego Police Department has. I mean, it's not just SDPD out there at these protests. It's also other police departments from other cities. The sheriff is getting in there and helping. I mean, it's a full-on police convention at these protests. And it's not even about, because for me and my politic, and I'll honor that it's different from others, I know when I'm out there at all the protests, I know that the person who is going to act up or put us in danger, it's going to be the police. The police are going to hurt somebody, push someone, and shout out to the legal observers, because it's usually the legal observers who are being hurt. And it's really, this is important. And I know you all said the work that you did on the body worn cameras stuff. And I also was alive and organizing in that time, and y'all didn't do that by yourself. You did it with the support of organizers and lawyers from ACLU who were informed by community. So like this meeting, I'm not saying I'm in all the spaces, but like, you know, as a protester, I felt like I would have known about it. It was rushed, I feel like. And I feel like this space needs to be open again for dialogue. And you know, Chair Brandon, you answered my question before when I said, was there any community involvement? And you said no, player. So I think it's a chance for community to get more time to get involved. People who've been on the ground, and also at least I would ask from your, you know, from you know, leaders in this space to imagine what it is like for teenagers coming out to their first protest, or older adults coming out to their first protest, or just anybody coming to their first protest, and they're hurt in the way that people were hurt this summer and have been hurt before by police who refuse to give their names, who refuse to wear their masks, and police who recognize and know you by face and name who you've never seen before, or police who didn't arrest you at that protest, but they arrest you at the second protest and they use even more force than before because they couldn't grab you the first time. So now they got you this time. Or for the protesters who sit in cars for hours waiting to be processed. You know, I mean, if there could be a centering of protesters in this policy, and I honor the time that you all give, but I think that 2020 has shown us a lot about stretching and being flexible and asking more of ourselves than we think we have. And I think that this policy is one of those instances. I don't want us to be passing a policy that's easy for SDPD to stomach. I don't. I want it to be something with strong language and something that's going to keep my friends, and other people in the community I love, and new people to the movement safe. And I want to assure, you know, members like Joe, Joe, I don't know what protest you're going to, man, but I haven't been to a protest with Molotov cocktails, you know, and no one is breaking those. And police are safer than we are. And we know that because when we come home to treat our wounds, we're a lot more banged up mentally and physically than we know that they are. So I just wanted to say my piece and let you know, Joe, I meant you no disrespect in the chat, but I am a person who was taught that when people are speaking incorrectly about me, I have to correct them. So I was working in that spirit. And Chair Brandon, I also want to encourage you to be a voice of the people and not the police. So thank you.
Okay. So for the record, I wasn't specifically asking you to be respectful. There was a couple of comments that were getting a little off topic, and that's why I was asking. And I said, please be respectful, guys. It was kind of global. It was not specifically to you. But thanks again for sharing your feedback. We have Ian and then Derek, and I know we're almost at our time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but Ian, go ahead. Ian, you might have to unmute yourself.
Okay, there you go. Hello,
Yep.
everyone. Thank you for this space. And just, you know, my comment is, you know, reading this draft, or I'm not sure if this is a draft, but this sort of San Diego Police Department procedure. What I'm suggesting is there should, I think, be a section that provides like guiding principles to law enforcement that sort of like provide a gist of what they're supposed to do in what the purpose of this document is, because it's a long document, and I'm not sure if a law enforcement officer who reads this is able to like digest everything. But I think if we have like probably like a front and first page or second page where at least there should be like some guiding principles as to, like, for example, somebody mentioned earlier, human life is always more important than property. I think those are like short guiding principles that they should have, that you should take to heart. Like, for another thing too is, like, for example, I attended the Otay Mesa car rally last year, and the police officers, and I think this is connected to what Alex mentioned earlier about the attitude arrest, where law enforcement was just citing and tickets to those who are in the car. We are being very peaceful, but the San Diego police just issued tickets to a lot of drivers for just being there. I think it's probably they were using the fact that it's the pandemic and then we're not supposed to be there at the detention facility, but we were actually social distancing. We are in our cars. We are not even going out of our cars, but yet a lot of the protesters got a ticket, were cited and got tickets. So probably another guiding principle is that these frivolous citations and charges should be discouraged, that are intended to stifle speech. And like also the guiding principle about the escalation. So I think that's my suggestion, that there should be this section that is easy to digest, so that when an officer is in doubt as to the protocols and the procedures, that they should be guided by some principles, short principles, probably 3 to 5 principles that they should have at least have in heart and mind. Thank you.
Hello, Derek Maloney here. Can you guys hear me? If you raise your hand. Hi, thank you. Thanks for holding these. 2 questions. I just went through the website that you guys got for the meetings, your Commission on Police Practices. If you guys could just put a link up in the chat for this report that you guys are talking about editing the drafts. If there's a link, make it easier for me to find it. I looked, I couldn't find it. Another thing is, I've heard in California, there's a law protecting police employee confidentiality that makes it really hard to do oversight of police, like an officer who's known to be a perjurer, but still being allowed to testify against people, or their record of complaints against the officer. Are these records available to defense, accused people, defendants? Is the law that protects police employee confidentiality, is that a sticking point that prevents transparent oversight of the police? So just those 2 things. Thank you.
Brandon, you're on mute.
Thanks. Short answer, yes. Obviously, discipline cannot be made public. I think if your question is about, can an attorney request information on if an officer has similar misconduct findings, yes, attorneys can take that to a judge. It's called a pitches motion. So an attorney does have the ability to do that. And then the judge basically would require that the department would hand over past complaints.
I heard that thing, but I heard there was lots of obstacles to get those processed openly and readily in time for defendants to, bring it up in their defense.
To be honest, I mean, we probably, CPP can't really comment on that really, because we're not part of that process. But I mean, I know that does happen, and it has happened, but yeah, Alex, I think I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that pitches motions are somewhat limited. So they're limited in scope as to the type of crime and allegation. So they don't apply across the board. You have to be able to fit it into the right case. But there obviously have been some efforts to try and make police records more accessible. And this is definitely an important issue, because if an individual has what we call priors, it is relevant to what's going on. And the question is, when we talk about having people on the force who represent the force, who aren't professional and aren't courteous and aren't respectful of the law, then there ought to be sanctions for those people the same way there are for people who don't obey the law who aren't police officers.
And then, Derek, I think your question, you're asking if the documents we were talking about today, if those are available online. Was that what your question was?
Yeah, that's right. I looked at the website with this describing this board, and I found agendas, but I didn't find sort of like the thing that you're going to submit to the city.
We haven't drafted that yet. So if you saw the agenda does have the policy, and it also has kind of the bullet points of the items that we saw we'd like to see clarification on or revisions to. But we haven't drafted our memo that's going to go to the city yet, just because that's going to be something we'll discuss at our open session meeting on next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Any other final questions from anybody? I know we're over, so I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's time, since people probably are wanting dinner.
Yeah, I just want to encourage everybody who's interested in this, and to tell everybody else who's interested in this to check into the open session meeting on Tuesday. There will be plenty of time for public comment, I'm sure. And the commission wants to hear from the community. There has been, over the years that I've been watching the commission, the former CRB, a sea change in the attitude of the commission, now commissioners, and people understand that the importance of community input, and I really urge the community to do that. And we can talk again about setting another forum, a roundtable like this, like Christina wants, and maybe Christina, your group can do it, or Darwin's Racial Justice Coalition can host it. Doesn't have to be the CPP. Anybody can do that, and we can get it out to our various groups and organizations. That's my pitch.
And one final thing from me. I have a team of about 15 people who have all been going to these protests as well. Between us, we have thousands of hours at these protests. I didn't bring those 14 people with me tonight, but in the future, if you guys do need their opinions, their testimony, or anything like that, they all have incredibly valuable insight for you as well. So, but for 15 people to speak.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everyone for your time today. I know spending 2 hours going over things like this is not always the most fun thing to do, but it's a very important thing for us to do. As Kate was saying, this is something that I think we feel is really important for the city to have a good, solid, robust policy that addresses protest-related activities. And I think we're on the right track. So it's, like I said, I anticipate we'll probably be making several recommendations over the next months and years. And as Katie also said, we definitely want to hear from the public. So always feel free to show up to our open session meetings. It's the 4th Tuesday of every month. And with that, we can adjourn our meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Nice to see you again, Alex.
Good night.